Fire. How does fire affect trees? Well, it depends upon the species of tree, of course, and the intensity of the fire. And in this case, I can imagine it was pretty darn hot. I'm assuming it started in this building right here and spread up and through here. I have no idea what was up on this area, but the telephone pole is scorched. The tree over there is completely scorched. That house looks like it has some fire damage, but that one wasn't where the fire started. Probably not a good place to park my truck. I'm gonna hope that those cables are holding that phone pole. I just realized that. But this is the tree or group of trees that they're most concerned about. These are some fairly old redwood trees that predate this development up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And there's significant fire damage to the trunk of this tree. There's also a lot of drying out, a lot of burning that's gone on. Many trees, when they're part of a fire, will succumb to the fire and it'll cause them to die. But redwood trees have an unusual characteristic that they seem to be able to withstand fires. And if you look at a lot of the old growth forests, you'll see that most of the really old ancient trees show evidence of past fire scars. Now, the degree of the fire and the intensity of the fire and the length of time that the fire burned are all going to be factors into how it affects the health of this tree. If it was a forest fire, say an understory brush fire that went through and burned the bark and then moved on, then the amount of time that the fire was baking this trunk would be considerably less than, say, a structure right underneath it that just cooks it and cooks it and cooks it. So, will this tree survive? That's why I'm here. The developers that are going to do the reconstruction want to know if this tree can be salvaged. And it's a tough guess. I really don't know. But I'll tell you what I do know. The location of this tree is not wonderful. Sometimes you have to look at a tree and try to evaluate what happened in the life of this tree. Now, this tree is hundreds of years old, but this house is probably 30, 40, maybe 50 years old. And somebody did some significant excavating down here to create a pad to put this house on. The trees were here first, so the damage to the roots, probably pretty significant, but the tree tolerated it and it survived. There's also a road up here. When this road was cut, a lot of the roots in this system, this area over here, were destroyed, and the tree survived. So that's a testament to the survivability of the trees, but it's also something that you have to recognize as being potential weaknesses. Now, people always try to take a little bit more and work their way in and make their property without much regard for what a tree needs or what a root system may be growing in. So this flat up here also was excavated when the house was put in, and this wall was put in. So I'm going to guess that there were roots cut over here and roots cut over there, and everybody thinks these tough old trees will continue to survive. So if the question is, will the tree survive? Probably, but I'm not sure. But the bigger question is, would you want to live downhill from a tree that's had all of its roots cut and the upper portion had the tree's roots damaged and the roots over on this side severed? Granted, they're big trees, but the root system on these big redwood trees don't go straight down in the ground. They spread radially all the way around. And the more the root system is compromised, the more potential there is for long-term root decay and weaknesses to develop. As the ground gets thoroughly saturated, all it's going to take is one big windstorm, and you can guess what the consequences would be. So, pros and cons. Let's talk about the pros first. When you have a grouping of redwood trees, all the roots from each of the trees sort of bind together to make a stronger mass. Now, when you have a tree that's been separated out or is on the edge of the grouping, and all of the roots are severed or damaged from past construction, then that tree is oftentimes the weaker individual in the grouping. Another pro is this tree is known to be resistant to fires. The bark is thick enough and they can oftentimes sprout out some new branches. There will be a lot that dies up there, but the tree will probably survive. Now the cons: if somebody's going to live in this house again, they have to be fully aware that there is a liability with living around large old trees. Had the tree's root system never been disturbed, I would say go for it. Live next to the trees. Live in the forest, live around the trees, but live with the trees. Don't take over their space and change things so dramatically that you create long-term potential hazards. Now the tree next door also shows a lot of fire damage. Not near as significant as what happened over here. Clearly there was a big deck up here that burned, and there's some fire damage on this tree over here, as well as the railing and some of the areas on this side of the house. Glass is shattered. There was a lot of heat here. Now let's look up into this tree, which they're also curious about, and you can see all the heat that rose on this side caused considerable damage, but there's still enough life up there that this tree will probably survive. Once again, the consequences of potential root loss or root severing from construction in the past could eventually become a problem.